Welcome, everybody, back to Deep Cuts of Horror, the horror podcast that cuts deeper. My name's Dylan, and I'm joined with my co host Jacob. Today, we are taking a look at The Curse, released in 1987. Jacob, maybe we should start this episode off by talking about our familiarity with H.P. Lovecraft, which this is technically an adaptation of one of his works, The Color Out of Space.
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of H.P. Lovecraft. I love basically every one of his stories that I have read. Now, I know his writing style is not for everyone. It's very verbose. He uses a ton of adjectives to describe everything, and it has a very dry and academic feeling to it, which personally I love because I think it makes the stories feel like they're actually occurring in the world rather than being some fictional narrative. And The Color Out of Space is one of the ones that I remember about medium ways. Like, it's not burned into my mind like something like Call of Cthulhu or At the Mountains of Madness is, but I feel
Take
like
a shot, everyone.
At the Mountains of Madness, they
Take
don't
another one.
they don't even understand that, Dylan. That was from The Thing, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah, that they don't know why you're. Do you want to explain that, or do you want to just cut it?
I think it's made it into a couple episodes that we've recorded. I think Wishmaster and Horror Express, which, by the way, go ahead and go back and listen to those episodes. You mentioned the mouth of madness very much.
The
Which
Mountains
was
of Madness.
oh, what did I say? The mouth of madness.
Yeah, you said the mouth, like the thing you eat with.
Yeah, that. Sorry, I was just thinking about a good nickname for someone's mama.
No, you're right. I probably have mentioned it in many other episodes, especially Horror Express, because it would have been very pertinent there. Not so sure what Wishmaster would have to do with it. But anyways, back to The
Probably
Color Out of
comparing it to a
Space.
better work.
Back to The Color Out of Space. This one in particular has some inherent difficulties with adaptation to the point where I would say it's probably unadaptable by definition, because the entire premise of the story is that there is this object that falls from the sky and has a color which all of the people who see it cannot describe, or rather it has a quality that all of the people who see it can't describe, and so they call it a color only by analogy. Basically, any attempt to put this into a visual medium fails automatically because it can't convey the premise of the story. I think the most you could do is to constantly have the object be off screen and only see the actors looking at it and commenting on how bizarre it is. And that would come off like some kind of hokey 1950s horror sci-fi episode. And I'm not sure that that would be particularly exciting. But I guess to try to concisely answer your question, I'm a huge fan of cosmic horror, and so this is the sort of thing that would be down my alley.
You saying that got me thinking. I don't think I've actually read any Lovecraft. I've read and seen a lot of stuff inspired by Lovecraft, whether it be Stephen King's Jerusalem's Lot, which is a short story in his Night Shift book, but it's very much, as you said, it's based on diary entries and also local almanacs, little excerpts from local almanacs about certain things that happened on that day. So that's how you get the macro perspective, other than the diaries. And then just Lovecraft's kind of become his own aesthetic. I'd say in recent years, probably in the last 30 years, the tentacle hands coming out from the deep has been something that's really captured the imaginations of many people and inspired a lot of stuff. Most recently, I watched, oh God, what was that Batman special? It was The Doom of Gotham or something to that nature, but it played into a lot of those themes that H.P. Lovecraft loves to dip his toe into.
I will make a note here. I don't want to sound too pretentious because God knows I don't need any help in that department, but cosmic horror is something that a lot of people seem to misinterpret in sort of the public consciousness, because the point of Lovecraft's work and the cosmic horror genre in general is the fear of the unknown and the fear of things being vastly beyond your comprehension and of you having some insignificant part to play in a grand universe beyond your control. And there are a lot of works that manage to capture that very well. But anytime somebody says, "Oh, I've seen works that are inspired by Lovecraft," you always have to take that with a grain of salt. The things you're describing sound like they were genuinely inspired by Lovecraft, but there are a lot of other works that you see in popular culture that tend to think that Lovecraftian horror is just people running around in old cars shooting tentacle monsters with a Tommy gun. And that sort of thing is, I don't even feel like it would be correct to call it a mockery of cosmic horror. It simply isn't cosmic horror. And I mean, if you enjoy it, there's nothing wrong with that, but I wouldn't try to equate it to the sorts of stories that we would be talking about.
Accurate. Whenever I think of, when you say cosmic horror, I do think of Lovecraft, and I think of, I love the way he has of, again, what we talked about it a little on the last episode, making everything seem so big. I love how it's very fact driven almost. So it makes you wonder what does happen on the micro scale of it. And I think that's where writers like Stephen King really come into play, because they are such micro focused people when it comes to their writing. Because you think of the stand, the sickness, you don't get so much of what's happening globally. You hear about what's happening globally through the perspective of military generals, people in the government, people at the CDC, and then you have everything from experiences from like 5-year-olds from their perspective of what's happening. So it's really interesting to hear these stories that are very grand in scale and supposed to be, I don't want to say common knowledge, but very official documents, as though they're to be read by the masses, and then interpret what are these people thinking. I think that's part of the fun of this cosmic, very grand horror, is thinking about how is this interpreted on the micro scale.
Well, yeah, all of that is exactly right. And I think that from a meta perspective, having stories be told from newspaper clippings and headlines and journals and personal interviews, and having that all sort of pieced together into one larger narrative is sort of a part of the entire ethos of cosmic horror. Um, I, I don't want to talk for too long about it, but one of the most famous quotes from Lovecraft is the opening paragraph of Call of Cthulhu, and there's a line from that reads, "The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But some day the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and our frightful position therein." And I'm not going to finish it out because I don't want to start rambling, but the idea is that the nature of our reality is so horrifying that if we were ever to fully comprehend it, if we were able to piece together those puzzle pieces, that it would be a horrifying discovery, right? So, maybe you have some string of tragedies that occur in a particular area, and then you also have like a murder that happened in a house down the street, and you have some government cover up, and then all of these things seem a little bit disparate, but when you piece them together and you start learning the truth about what really happened, it just reveals some horrifying understanding of the situation that you would rather have simply not known about.
Again, I don't want to talk on it too long, but that is the big appeal for me with cosmic horror.
After such a glowing recommendation of the cosmic horror genre, we are now about to move into a film that may not quite achieve those accolades.
No, no. Um,
I just don't want people to
Perhaps we could.
misinterpret my passion for Lovecraft with my passion for this film.
Yeah, go ahead, get that out of the way. I know we made a lot of jokes and stingers throughout the episodes about how if we had to see Carnival of Souls one more damn time, but a little spoiler, we already watched this episode and it just didn't pan out. So if I have to watch this movie one more damn time, I'm gonna be highly upset. But anyway, let's go over the synopsis so that those who might not want to watch this movie or haven't seen it yet will kind of know what we're talking about overall. So, when a meteorite lands near his family farm during a storm in Tennessee, the son of a struggling farmer believes it's connected to a strange plague-like events afflicting the crops, the farm animals, and even the family themselves. Now, in summation, from what I've read about The Color Out of Space, that's essentially what happens. It's just a matter of the follow through and the play out of this where it falls apart.
Yeah. So again, I don't remember every detail of the story, but the gist of The Color Out of Space is that there is this surveyor who is coming to this town. It's outside Arkham because, everything that Lovecraft writes is related to Arkham somehow. And there's this blasted heath, which is just like this big area of destroyed land. And then that surveyor is trying to piece together the story of what happened. And you start to learn about this family and what happened to them on their farm and this bizarre thing that came from the sky. And then you learn that by the end of it, there's going to be like the area is going to be flooded. And so the surveyor is kind of ruminating on the fact that all of this is going to get washed away and forgotten. Yeah. With again, the core premise being that this thing that came from the sky was so alien to us that we lacked the ability to describe it.
I know we've talked several times also on the pod about faithfulness of an adaptation, and just last week we watched a movie that was so much different than its source material and setting. Do you believe that maybe the setting shift in this one had something to blame for this movie a little bit?
No, not at all. And I don't want to come out the gate hating on this movie too much because I think there are two different axes on which I would evaluate it. One is as its own film, and the other is as an adaptation of The Color Out of Space. And I think that depending on which perspective you approach from, you're going to get two different experiences. The setting itself, I think, is fabulous. I wouldn't consider it to be meaningfully different from the setting of The Color Out of Space, if at all. It's just sort of rural, uh, almost idle. I'm kind of blanking on the correct word there, but it's this lovely place out in the country. It's a farm. It's set in Tennessee. The Curse is, which is funny because there are multiple terrible movies called The Curse or Cursed, which are set in Tennessee. Uh,
You might say it's cursed.
yeah, don't if you're thinking about making a horror movie, don't make it in Tennessee and put the word curse in the title. Also, don't cast Whil Wheaton. But um,
Stop that. He's a pleasure. I'm on my Star Trek The Next Generation rewatch. I love Wesley Crusher.
I think the setting is one of the best parts of the film. The setting really gives you this feeling of being removed from society, of being out on your own, but it's also very peaceful. And you know that anything that happens here isn't going to be noticed by broader society for quite some time.
It makes me wonder why they even changed it. I know, like we were talking last time, Candyman had a reason for doing it, just because and that shifted the whole perspective of the film. But here, I don't really see what we glean from changing it from Arkham, Connecticut to Tellico Plains, Tennessee.
Well, I guess that depends on what you mean by a change of setting, because obviously Arkham is not a real place. And when you change the setting, I think it implies not only that you've changed the name of the city or the town that it takes place in, but also that there's something meaningfully different about it. Like with Candyman, taking it out of Liverpool and putting it in Chicago, well, the subject matter of some kind of class divide and poverty might remain the same, but the cultural significance of the people and the groups involved is different, right? Like the economic disparities in Chicago culturally are going to be a lot different than they are somewhere in the UK. And I think that simply replacing fictional rural town with real rural town, both in the same country, is probably fine. It didn't even register with me necessarily as being a change of setting, more so just that they decided, hey, we're going to make this adaptation. We want to put it somewhere. I mean, if anything, putting it in Arkham would have solidified it as canonically Lovecraft, which I think would have made it worse because obviously I don't think they were able to deliver on that.
Yeah. I was wondering too, is there a strong religious undertone to the story itself that maybe would lean itself better to be set in the South, where religious overtones, let's say, are a lot stronger? But I mean, it's a good MacGuffin for the story in the disbelief of, the sciences and the unknown versus someone who is, uh, the very righteously led by a god, that sort of thing. So I was wondering, is that present in the short story any?
To my recollection, no. But I will put a caveat to that. I do not recall there being any specifically Christian or even specifically religious tones of any kind to the story. But a lot of Lovecraft's works do focus on the idea of locals having bizarre or backward customs, and those customs putting them at odds with broader society, especially the ostensibly educated, primarily white academia that Lovecraft tends to uh, draw his narrators from. And so the idea that there is this sickness that came from the sky that is causing all of these problems in this sort of rural town, and the people there don't want anyone from the outside involved because they prefer to remain their own culturally distinct people with their own values. That's a pretty Lovecraft thing overall. Like you get the same feeling from The Shadow over Innsmouth, for example, with the culture of the Deep Ones and the stories of how they interacted with each other and whatnot.
Yeah, you got a point there, and I don't want to say it isn't present in the northern states like Connecticut and stuff, but I feel like very much in the South there's such a sense of community that is found in, I mean, especially church and small town. It's probably only rivaled by high school football, honestly, as far as local towns go, and college ball, those sort of things. So I feel like that sense of community, you can sort of draw that if you have one religious figure, there is a whole slew of people in the town who think the same way because they're a part of a community that have that same custom, like you were saying.
Yes, and it's in addition to it being about the local customs, it's also about a sense of independence. I mean, arguably paradoxically, these small communities that have a strong sense of community also have a strong sense of independence. So like if something is going wrong with your family, you feel like it's your responsibility to handle it. You don't want a bunch of people from the outside coming in and telling you what to do. And part of that isn't okay, part of that is pride, but part of that is also just a distrust of the outsider. Because just like some allegedly educated city person might feel a distrust of rural folk would feel a distrust of them because their lifestyles and their value systems are so different. So yeah, the idea of these remote peoples just wanting to do things their own way is a pretty common theme, and it's also understandable. And I think one other thing to add to that is because this film is taking place at the micro level, as you said, like we are watching this family experience these things rather than just hearing about it through newspaper clippings, for example. We have to have personality to the characters. Like we have to actually see them and hear them and learn about them. And so that element of religiosity is just something that would probably be present.
You have a point there, but while you were talking, I was also thinking about how you have this presence of the outsider, and that. that does make me think a lot of Will Wheaton's character, because for all intents and purposes, he is very much the outsider of this story. Uh, just because, if for no other reason than he feels like an outsider, because his mother married this man and married into this family that he really, even just by looking at him, he just looks out of place, and you can tell he's struggling to fit into this new family, as every teenager honestly would. It's a big change. But I feel like you get that sort of theme played out in that too.
Absolutely. And that is an excellent point because, yeah, just like you said, you have the sort of outsider versus insider dynamic at the communal scale. You also have it within the family scale. And I personally felt like that dynamic was very relatable because when you have a joining of the families like that, what you have is at a household level a sort of cultural cross pollination where one part of the family is bringing in their own experiences and values, the other part of the family is bringing theirs. There's going to be some power struggle, there's going to be some kind of polymerization of what this family means, and being a child caught up in that can be very frustrating because you're still in the process of forming your identity, and a part of you feels like this shift in culture might cause a shift to your person. It's almost like an existential threat, and trying to navigate that, something as mundane as, oh hey, my mom got married again or my dad got married again, that can be a completely world changing experience for you. And I felt like that was very relatable. Like I think that was honestly done pretty well.
I will agree, and I know this was a bit heavy handed at first with things that, this movie didn't do right, but I will say, on rewatching it this go around, I'll say one thing that really stood out to me was the cinematography. There were some shots in this that were just beautiful, especially in regard to when the meteor hits the Earth, and we have the scene of them basically on top of the meteor, and the meteor is glowing. Also, it coming down from the sky, and a bunch of scenes with Will Wheaton's character in the fog. I thought a lot of that was very beautifully shot. And I feel like even though this was filmed in Rome instead of Tennessee for some odd reason, they did a good job of capturing the look of Tennessee. Now, there are some places, especially with our little cold open to the film, I believe that was filmed in actual Tennessee, because that neighborhood looks it just looks very rural Tennessee. And I can't put my finger on it, but something about the way it looks just looks like Tennessee. Especially because I've been to Tellico Plains and I know how it looks. The houses just have a similar look to them. I don't know. I can't really explain it.
Yeah, I would be hard pressed to believe that that intro sequence was filmed in Rome. I wouldn't demand that it had to be Tennessee, although I agree with you, it looked a lot like Tennessee. But I don't think it was Rome. But a bulk of the film was filmed in Rome. And that confuses me. I feel like that has to be some kind of legal or procedural or even just like preferential decision on the part of the people who made this film, because they went to Rome to do it, but they filmed in a location that looks just like Tennessee. So that tells me that maybe they just wanted to go to Rome, or maybe it was cheaper, or maybe there were different laws there regarding the filming. What do you think about that, if anything?
Uh, yeah. I mean, I agree. I think a lot of it was there. The laws are a bit different, especially in terms of child labor, which we'll get into later on. But I just looked it up. Pretty much all of the farm stuff, anything to do with the farm, which is like 80% of the movie, just takes place in Rome. So basically, all of the Will Wheaton scenes are in Rome, and the rest were done in Tellico Plains, Tennessee, and Atlanta.
Just as a small note, to have a story set in Tennessee, a place with which I am familiar, that's one level of familiarity. But for some reason, when I hear a character in the story mention a different place in Tennessee, that just makes me really happy. Like at one point, I think the character of Charlie mentioned Smyrna, Like, if they don't get the dam here, then it'll probably go to Smyrna instead. And like that just adds a level of immersion that I really appreciate.
That's another thing about this movie that I really enjoyed. They do a damn good job of including Tennessee, but I think most of that is because, again, all the shots that don't feature Whil Wheaton were done in Tennessee. You have the Tennessee flag, Tennessee license plate. Our main character is wearing a Vols jersey. Well, one of them's wearing a Vols jersey through the whole movie. He's watching a Vols game on TV. There's all these little nods that I feel like you wouldn't get in other movies, especially since I live close to a town that does a lot of movie filming for Hallmark and several other actual horror projects too. They don't really go out of their way to highlight that this is Alabama, where I am, like this movie does with Tennessee. They did a really good job.
I lo- I love the way you phrased all of the shots that don't feature Whil Wheaton were filmed in Tennessee, as though they simply flew Whil Wheaton out to a field in Rome, shot 90% of the movie in Tennessee, but every time he's on screen, they just like pan to a GoPro.
I mean, that's pretty much what they
I,
did.
yeah,
That's pretty much what they did because every scene that isn't with him in it is its own little standalone scene where we have these little side characters like the sheriff. We have this scientist guy from the TVA. We have a real estate developer. We have all these people there talking, and Will Wheaton's not in any of these scenes. But for some reason, those are the scenes that feel most like Tennessee, and I just appreciate the hell out of it. Also, including a subplot about the TVA. Like that, again, that's just this movie putting in that work to add. It's something they didn't have to do, especially a movie like this, but I appreciate that they did it.
firstly, I think the subplot with the TVA was an attempt at connecting it to the short story, The Color Out of Space, because again, it was a surveyor that was the perspective character in that story, and it was a way of having the events occur and then having some character looking back on those events many months later. Secondly, I agree with you that I appreciated all of these scenes because they felt so much like Tennessee, but they created a really weird feeling in me as I was watching this film because about halfway through it, I just very distinctly thought, this is the weirdest episode of Andy Griffith I've ever seen.
It's a Halloween special.
Obviously, I'm being facetious, but I mean that. Like, this feels like some episode of a rural family TV show that you just might see on TV Land, like some bizarre version of Andy Griffith or the Waltons or what have you. It really does capture that small town uh, Southern values feeling very, very well. Even so far as to have a shady businessman character trying to take land from people. I mean, how many times have we seen that in the past, Sheriff Wayne John?
When you put it like that, I can have a little bit more love for it. Simply because it does seem, you're right, like a wonderful world of Walt Disney Saturday night, which used to be a thing for all you kids out there before Disney Plus was a thing. You had the wonderful world of Disney. And like Friday, Saturday night, they play a movie, sometimes original, sometimes just a re airing of an old movie. But they would always follow a sort of familiar formulaic plot. And this is definitely one of those. But it's like if that happened and then they just got permission to make it an R rated movie and also included a bunch of gore effects. Were there any scenes in this movie that stuck out to you, Jacob?
Yes, there were a few. The first would be the opening scene, where we have some kind of violent altercation occurring and a gentleman being dragged off in the back of a police car. And he keeps repeating the phrase, it's in the water, or variations of that phrase as he's looking out the window of the police car, seeing people, seeing children playing in sprinklers, seeing people washing their cars. And there's just this ominous dread that if you're watching the film for the first time, you don't really even understand, what does he mean it's in the water? What's the context? Because again, it's the opening scene. But I think that establishes firstly a great sense of mystery because it makes you ask yourself, well, what happened here? What is this altercation? Why is this guy afraid of the water? And what's going to happen to these people? But secondly, I think that is just an excellent source of fear because water is something that we all rely on to survive. And water is also one of our critical public infrastructures. So the idea that something in the water is dangerous is a genuinely terrifying thing. I mean, that's something that you as a real human being are going to encounter far more often than vampires or even burglars breaking into your home. And it's also a threat that you can't see and you can't really fight. I mean, yeah, you can get a water filter or you can complain to your local government, but if you just pour yourself a glass of water and there's some pathogen in there that's going to cause some horrifying disease, you're not even going to know that. You're just going to drink it and then something horrible is going to happen to you. It's a threat. It's a source of fear that you can't fight, and it infects one of the most critical parts of your everyday life. And so if you were just to take that opening scene in isolation, I think it creates a great sense of fear. Maybe that's just me, but I've always been afraid of that phrase, there's something in the water. Before I move on to a different scene, did you have any feelings about that or about something similar?
Well, I just wanted to note that Jacob and I, from also being from small town Tennessee, we know a thing or two about being a authority on the matter of terrible water. This is my little soapbox on that. For as long as I've known, the water where we're from has come up brown or a very cloudy color that you have to let settle for a few minutes before it finally turns clear.
Yeah, and it feels like homemade slime. Like there have been times where the water comes out basically as a semi-solid. And at the moment, the people who live in that area are receiving, I think, monthly or perhaps quarterly letters from the local government explaining exactly how much of the water you would have to consume at a certain body weight before it would have a huge chance of giving you cancer. So, and they are working on it, or at least I've been told they're working on it and trying to bring that number down. But yeah, the water there is basically undrinkable. And so, at a personal level, for both myself and Dylan, the idea of water being corrupted in some way is a very real experience. Like to this day, I do not use tap water for anything that involves consumption. I always use some kind of distilled water or bottled water in some way, and I only use tap water for bathing or washing dishes.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible. And one would argue that really any chance of water giving you cancer is enough to really get people's foot in gear. But I don't know who's been testing the water, but as many times as they test it or have tested it and it's come back okay. It's basically our version of the bureaucratic nature of something that's very scary. I just feel, and I feel like that would have been something to play on more, like people actually understanding the threat and then having the looming fear of, but we still need water, and doing things like we've seen done where people are bringing in water or they're trying to boil water to make it clean and wondering does that actually help in this circumstance.
That is an element of that source of fear, but I think it's probably out of scope for this film. I mean, this film is very much about the impact on this one family, and the idea of it impacting broader society is more of a sting at the end. So I don't think we really needed to see that. And we did see a little bit of it with Will Wheaton's character bringing in water and other supplies from the town rather than eating from the garden or drinking from the well, which was very, very intelligent on his part. But again, also kind of feeds into that idea of this source from which we live has been corrupted, and now I have to kind of bring things in to survive.
Yeah, and that was one of the scenes I really liked too. The scenes where he's caring after his little sister, who in real life is his little sister. I found those scenes very genuine and authentic. And as far as the acting in this movie, I think those are some of my best scenes that don't feature actual effects.
Another scene, and I don't know if you would consider this an effect or not, but opening up all of the fruits and vegetables and having them just be filled with dirt and worms, despite the fact that they looked so beautiful and ripe. I think that was pretty effective as well, just because it was a very simple way of showing the impact of this uh, extraterrestrial object on the surrounding life. I mean, there's a huge eerie uh, contradiction there of all of your plants being so bountiful. You have such a bountiful harvest of all of these beautiful, ripe, luscious, and colorful fruits and vegetables, but then all of them are just sickly inside and completely inedible. It makes you ask, what is happening here?
Yeah, and one thing that I wish we got to see was maybe a little bit more of how this whatever the water does to things works. Because for some reason it makes plants look really great and ugly on the inside, and it makes people and animals look really gross and act really gross. But I like those scenes too. It was something that really gave this movie its almost dreamlike quality, and I'm not saying that in a good way. It's just more of a fever dream.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it in a good way, but I also wouldn't say it in a bad way. I just think that something about the way it's shot and the atmosphere makes it feel like a dream. And almost it has a bit of a relaxing vibe to me. Like, despite the horrible subject matter, this is the sort of movie that I could just put on the TV and then go to sleep. Like, something about it is very calming.
Oh yeah, I wish it wasn't horror, almost because it's so relaxing seeing the Tennessee countryside and just seeing the farmland and just the quaint family dynamic. Like stuff is brewing under the surface, but for all pretents and purposes, you have basically this idyllic town with enough family struggle to keep the story spicy and going. That alone will be enough, but then you have this meteor landing into Earth and causing all these things to happen, which brings me to my next little point. I didn't I wish we got to see more of a build up to these things. We kind of get to the mother, she's sort of the build up, but I wish we got to see a more extended version of this build up of things going uh slowly insane, these people realizing that they're going crazy or something's happening to them instead of them just being fully in the throes of whatever's wrong with them.
Yes, I think personally that the climax is the weakest part of this film. I think that almost every other part has something that you can really appreciate, but once we get to the full-blown insanity, it really is just like a generic goblin fighting campaign. Like, there's just these ugly creatures, which are of course the family members, especially the father and uh, the brother, and they're trying to kill you and you're trying to survive, and there's really nothing deeper to it than that. Like, they don't even really analyze the potential conflicted feelings you would have attacking uh members of your own family. And it really does just, I don't think it's right to say that it comes out of nowhere, because in a certain sense the entirety of the film has been building up to this, but there really isn't an appropriate transition. And I think it would have been better if maybe we had a clearer understanding of what these characters were like before the water started affecting them. I give you one example, which is the father character, who is probably my favorite character in the film. He is very steeped in traditional values. He's very stern, You can tell that he does have a sense of humor, but it only comes out very rarely. And I know that for a lot of people, this character could come off as a dick or maybe even as abusive. Whereas to a lot of other people, he might just come off as a normal guy, maybe a little bit awkward. But we see him doing things like punishing Whil Wheaton's character for blaspheming. We see him, say, criticizing the dryness of his biscuits. And then as things start to get worse, we see him sequestering the uh, the wife who is falling ill and eventually tying her to a bed, believing that her adultery has caused a curse to fall upon the household. And I think my question about all of that is he doing this because he's starting to go crazy from the water himself? Or is this just part of his normal personality? I mean, obviously, you could make the argument that it's a predisposition he had that's being exacerbated by the water, but I'd like to know how much of that is him and how much of that is the water. And I don't feel like I got a clear notion of that.
Oh yeah, but another thing is I would have liked to seen a genuinely good person affected by this as well. Because the way the movie works, and it was kind of apparent to pick up from the beginning, is you have these already very flawed characters, right, that get infected, and you know whatever this water's doing is going to enhance these flaws. Which is strange because it really doesn't enhance them in an ironic sort of way. It just makes them all the same level of deranged and crazy, save for the stepbrother. I mean, from the beginning, the stepbrother's pretty much a cartoon character, but by the end of it, he is a full fledged Saturday morning cartoon character, running and hopping around and making very, very animated noises.
Yeah, you do bring up a good point. We don't see any really decent person that gets corrupted by the water. I mean, like you said, the brother is a cartoon character. He's basically just the Tennessean Dudley Dursley.
Yeah,
Uh,
worse than that, he is your copy paste bully character.
yeah, and it just kind of makes you wonder, like, how the people in that family even tolerate his behavior. The
And
wife,
I don't
sorry,
know the way. Well, I was gonna say too, and given the time frame and everything, well, the time distance from now to when this movie was released, honestly, I kind of felt bad for him. Because honestly, I feel like there may be some sort of mental handicap there. Like, I know he's supposed to be portraying like this kind of juvenile asshole, but the way it came across was he was a bit touched.
no, that is entirely possible. It's I think it's so easy to misinterpret what I'm about to say that I probably shouldn't even say it, but I don't mean anything by this. It can be difficult sometimes to tell whether someone's behavior derives from them having some kind of mental, uh, I guess, just condition, or whether they are just an asshole. Uh, and so, like, I definitely could see how that might be the source of his behavior, but I could also just as easily see him being a dick.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of overacting the situation a bit, but also seeing the script and how everything's written. It's not like he really had that much room to work with the character. It is again copy and paste bully that rolled a 1 on charisma. So there's no redeeming quality to him. There's really no irredeeming quality to him. His character is just the bully. Like if he can, and he's not going to be like a major asshole, but it's not like he's a Stephen King bully where he's going to pull out a knife and try to cut you. He's just more of your general school bully who's going to knock your papers out of your hand and create a mild annoyance, but all the time.
Yeah, but that's still pretty problematic because, at least judging by his size, he's got to be in his mid to late teens, right?
Yeah, I assumed him and Will Wheaton were peers. Will Wheaton's always kind of played the, I don't want to like the runt of the litter character. That was kind of his character in Stand By Me. He was shorter and scrawnier, and you know, kind of the more silent type. That's always been his character.
And then you have the father character, which, as I've already mentioned, is most probably too stern. He's not very charismatic. He's very cold and distant, very severe. And if we got to see more interactions between him and his family, it could very easily swing either to the direction that he's a bit of a weird guy or that he is abusive. And then we have the wife character, Whil Wheaton's mother. It's very heavily implied that she married the father because she was having monetary troubles, which is an unethical thing to do. And she cheats on him in like the first 10 minutes of the film with the gentleman that they'd hired to dig the well. So all three of the main characters that we see corrupted by the water are pretty despicable people. And we don't really get to see any character like Will or his sister Annie, I believe is her name, right?
Yes.
Yeah, or anyone else. Like, for example, Charlie, even though Charlie certainly would not qualify as a decent person. Maybe the land surveyor. Would you say that the land surveyor was being affected by the water in the beginning?
I don't think so.
That
Uh,
that whole issue,
you mean the cold open?
yeah, the cold open.
Yeah, yeah, because I think he had like a mark on his face.
Yeah, and then at the end when he's in the hospital, he's in like a full body cast.
Yeah, I'd say he was being affected by the water. Unless you're assuming that the people from the government or whoever picked him up just beat the shit out of him, put him in a body cast. Because I feel like that might be what happened to our town's water. Someone whistle blew and got the shit beat out of him.
So I guess we do get to see a fairly decent person in the TVA guy being affected by the water. And honestly, that whole altercation with him still kind of confuses me. I'm not sure I fully understood it, but he does seem to retain a lot of his humanity and a lot of his personality. Maybe it just didn't have a chance to progress as far with him.
Well, also there was distance too. It landed on their farm and got in their well with their water, so they would have gotten a higher concentration of whatever was going on. I know we talked about the family dynamic a little bit, but I gotta say, for what I saw, I kept forgetting that he had a little sister.
Yeah, she's really terribly underutilized in this film. She gets attacked by some chickens, and that's tragic. And as I understand it, that might
Oh
have
no, that
actually
was
been filmed.
that was real. This movie had a lot of issues, so much so that Will Wheaton refuses to sign anything from this or even really acknowledge it. Apparently, his set conditions were really bad, and I mean, you hear about movies with real bad set conditions, but a lot of um, actors just consider it part of the craft of doing things. But there is a certain element of protection you have to go into when you're going to work with child actors. And one of those things was, again, the sister character, who was played by Will Wheaton's actual sister, was attacked by chickens that were thrown at her and filmed, which is kind of gross.
And if anyone has ever had the privilege of being around a bunch of angry chickens, that is not something that you should be exposing a young child to. I mean, I've been in situations where you have to kick away chickens that are trying to jump at you and claw you, and I certainly wouldn't want my daughter, for example, that young, being exposed to that.
Nope, and but thankfully she was unharmed for the most part. Um, so whenever they did the makeup effects for her scars, they actually cut her to get that effect.
Before we get into that, which I think we need to get into because that sounds like a huge can of worms, I will just finish the point that the character of the sister is very underutilized. Apart from her being attacked by the chickens and the occasional scene between her and Will's character, you can pretty much just forget that she's in the film entirely. Like, if you were to remove her character, I don't think it would have affected anything. But
I think it just gives him some agency outside of himself. Because you can tell he kind of resents his mother for the situation they're in. And if it's just him, he can just peace out and leave. But because she's there, he's kind of stuck to protect her, at least until things get bad, and especially in the climax.
yeah, and it gives us a more sentimental reason to root for him because even though everybody is entitled to protect themselves, um, selfish motivations are often seen with less favor than, say, protecting someone else. And so, yeah, giving him that character to protect and shelter from all of this chaos gives us an additional reason to root for him beyond just, hey, protect yourself. But if they had to include her for that reason, then they should have done more with her. I don't think that that's something you should really be half assing.
No, especially since they literally flew the whole family out to Rome.
But do you want to talk more maybe about some of the conditions on this set? Because I mean, when we get into like intentionally cutting children and throwing chickens at them and underpaying and overworking them, I feel like it's not something we should gloss over.
Oh yeah, no, but there was a lot that went on in this film production, and again, we all have stories, especially in this genre, of really rough working conditions. Well, I know we haven't covered it on the pod, but just look at the making of Evil Dead. Um, I think the big thing to think about is that in situations like that, those were fully consenting adults, and Will Wheaton and his sister didn't have the agency over themselves to be able to say no. It really caused a rift with their parents because their parents kind of pushed them to make this movie that he didn't want to make. And they made him take this trip, and anytime something would come up that he didn't want to do, they would make him do it under, and the gaslighting and everything that comes with it. So that's really what also makes it unfortunate, not just the physical harm that was done, but the mental and emotional harm that comes along with it.
And it knowing those sorts of things really kind of makes you feel uncomfortable watching the film, or at least it did me, because there were some elements of this film that I liked a lot, and there were some elements that I thought fell flat. But the whole time I was watching it, I just kind of had this icky feeling of this is sort of an artifact of ill-gotten gains that I'm not entirely certain I'm comfortable appreciating.
Oh yeah. And again, it's very unfortunate to see those kind of things. Like in the scene where we meet Will Wheaton's character, he's shoveling manure onto the planting field, and he gets pushed into it, and you can just see in his face that he's upset because this is real manure that they used. And it is wet and it is gross. Whereas in every other movie, you would cut your costs and just, I don't know, water down some mud because it looks exactly the same. Yeah, you water down some dirt and make mud. And then we had, uh, again, long shooting hours because rules were a little different over there. They could work longer hours and do more stuff. And that meant doing a lot of takes on things that were very problematic to film, and you do see some of that, and unfortunately the movie suffers from it because you can tell Will Wheaton is giving as little as Will Wheaton can give.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not entirely sure where to go from here.
Oh yeah, it's a very uncomfortable subject, and it's a very uncomfortable subject matter. However, it just needed discussed because this did happen in this movie, and we would be remiss if we didn't talk about it at least a little bit because it's kind of just an elephant in the room of this movie's production.
Quite a bit ago at this point, I talked about how I was personally disappointed with the climax. Did you want to share your feelings on the climax?
Yeah, it never really felt like it was built up to. It just was one of those things that kind of happened. I know we were talking last time about Trey Parker and Matt Stone, how you should do stuff. It just quit being a circumstances thrown at them and was just a circumstance they were in. I feel like the movie had to end somewhere, but they didn't know how to end it. So they just created this elaborate set, which was actual wood and glass that was falling. The climax features the house kind of jumbling around as the ground shakes beneath them, that sort of thing. That was actual wood and actual, yeah, very few safety regulations, but I digress. Anyway, um, when they made this movie, when they made it in Rome. Uh, I think they also got like a stipend for filming there too. There was like tax credits that came with it, so they were able to film more. And I feel like a lot of money went into this little bit of effect that they had at the end. I just wish it had tied more into the plot, and that it's one of those things. While all this is happening, you have what I call the final transformation of all these main characters into whatever ghoulish form they're going to take. Uh, and unfortunately, we don't get to see that build up into that. It just kind of happens, so it's all thrown at you. And it just didn't land with me, period, because I didn't feel anything for these characters. So seeing this happen to them, I just didn't really have anything but a mild curiosity to see how this crazy would take form, but there was no real manifestation of a different kind of crazy. It was just they're crazy and they're going to try to kill people.
Yeah, and there are just several different problems with trying to execute this effectively. Like, as I already mentioned, we don't really explore the idea that the people that you're fighting are your former family and any kind of emotional distress that might come from that. It really just felt like a zombie killing spree. And then back toward the beginning of the episode, when I talked about how the essence of cosmic horror is not gunning down eldritch abominations with a Tommy gun, that's sort of the same issue here. I mean, we have an elongated fight slash chase scene where Wil Wheaton's character is fighting against the corrupted version of the father and the brother and trying to escape this house where everything is falling apart. And it just doesn't work because that's not where the source of the fear is. The source of the fear is not in these makeup muppets trying to kill you with an axe. It's in the fear of the unknown and the fear of your life, uh, the things necessary for your life being corrupted and uh, and things of that nature. And I think that I'm not sure how I would have handled the climax, but I think that it would have it would have been more in line with emphasizing the mystery of what happened rather than trying to create this kind of gore fest. Because if my memory serves me, the climax of The Color Out of Space, when everybody's going crazy and there's all of these supernatural occurrences on at the farm, we see like the color spreading across the trees and the farm and out of the well, and then it all sort of like congregates into an entity, like not like a any kind of anthropomorphic entity, like it was a ghost or something, but just as though it had its own will, no pun intended. And then it kind of shoots off back into the sky. And there's a little bit of a haunting bit at the end where one of the people watching realized that some of it didn't go back into the sky. And so there may be some left on Earth, and who knows what'll happen there. It wasn't it wasn't about fighting off monsters. It wasn't about trees and houses flying into the air, which I don't even understand what I was supposed to take from that. That was just completely out of left field. I just think it missed out on mystery and wonder and sci-fi magic by trying to give us a monster movie. And for what it's worth, I think the makeup was good, but I just don't think that's where we should have gone.
Well, the makeup was okay. I've definitely seen better makeup, especially on the mother. That just looked like it was tacked on, unfortunately. And part of that's because part of her skin's also supposed to be coming on off, but Anyway, I feel like a better ending to this would have involved maybe they have to go back to the meteor and get more of the liquidy goo that was in it. Maybe they have some sort of addiction to it, and that way you can have the climax take place at the meteor. Or maybe they're trying to get Will himself to drink, and something has to happen where he saves them, and something inadvertently, I don't know, gets rid of the people or gets rid of the meteor, or he finds a way to destroy the meteor, and in doing so it destroys the monsters but also, kills the family.
Well, the meteor is gone. The meteor completely disappears. So you'd had
But
to
Will
change
can
that
still
element.
see the color though. And that's another great shot too, is when Will's able to see the color of the meteor through his window. That's a great shot. I love all the just stoic shots of the house at night. That's super creepy, and it does give really good it just gives really good vibes. I don't know. I just this movie left me lacking.
Yeah, and I think it really is just a function of the ending being disappointing because when I think back to most of the film, again, all of the scenes with the family, Will and the stepfather and the mother and the brother, even the weird Andy Griffith subplots with the TVA guy and the businessman, and there's
Felt
even
like
a
a completely different movie.
completely different movie, yes. But and there's even another one that we didn't really touch on where I'm pretty sure there's this other gentleman in the town whose wife is having an affair with Charlie. Is that right? Or they're trying to use Charlie to make a bunch of money and move into the city.
I think so. The problem is there's about 3 men in this movie that look way too similar. So I am always confusing which one is which.
And then there's even a subplot where the TVA guy brings a sample of the meteor to this lab to have it tested. And there's just this gloriously awkward performance by one of the lab guys who just extremely calmly says, "It's a new element. It's something we've never seen before." And then in the next breath is like desperately shouting, "Everyone is in danger. You have to do something." It's so weird. But yeah, you have all of these subplots that I really like. I like them all, even though it feels like a different movie. And I like interacting with the family. I like 80, 90% of this film. And then they just destroy the landing. They completely crash it, I think, with the end. It just goes nowhere.
Well, the ending's just very unearned and makes it doesn't really make any sense given contrasts. I mean, I get that the house absorbs moisture, but if you're trying to tell me that the house has now become evil because of the water, and shot up into the air, no, I'm sorry.
Do you think that's where they got that idea? Like maybe, okay, so the color is going back up into space and the color was in the water. And so, like, when the water goes up into space, it takes whatever the water was in. Do you think that's what they were going for?
Perhaps. I feel like a better ending would have also been if just the people who had drank the water went back up into space. So, like the 70-ish% of the human body that is water went up with it. So it basically just like skinned these people alive.
Yeah, it like evaporates and desiccates whatever was containing it. I think
Hmm.
that would have been much. And I do you think they could have done that with the effects they had?
I'm sure there's a workaround with it. I'm sure a lot of their money, though, went to making the comet, the asteroid, whatever. And then the whole scene where they're like, oh, yeah, it was just a Joe Dirt blowing bomb. I kind of gotta laugh at that because I'll never forget the scene in Joe Dirt where he thinks he found a meteor, but it's really just a frozen chunk of shit, as they say, from an airplane.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that even the father character starts laughing at that because it's just such a ridiculous proposition.
Yeah, but you would know that that wouldn't happen because, like, he stabbed it and, like, all that goo is coming out. That makes that even more gross.
Well, it also makes you wonder where it went. I mean, do giant balls of shit have a habit of disappearing? when they're as large as a shed.
I tried looking up what happened or when that happened because I don't feel like that happens anymore. Or if it ever happened, and I couldn't really find anything on it. But apparently, it's enough for there to be two movies with that as a plot point.
I mean, yeah, I would have to look into that too, because I mean, certainly it either has to be an accidental thing that happens only on occasion, or it's an intentional feature of the aircraft, but they have to make sure they drop it in uninhabited locations. I mean, you can't just be dropping giant shit balls into inhabited areas on a regular basis.
Imagine having to call your insurance.
Do you think that qualifies as an act of God? I mean, it does kind of feel like God shitting on you, literally.
God, no, sorry. The scene in my head just went through of Joe Dirt eating fries and tenders off of the meteor, and when he takes it to the scientist, he's like, "No, see right there, points a flashlight in it. That's a peanut." And Joe Dirt says, "No, that's a space peanut."
Well, I think when we start to dwell on Joe Dirt, we might have lost the plot a little bit.
I mean, did you have anything else to add?
No, I think we're about ready to wrap up.
So, this is a segment of our show where we decide whether this movie is deep or if it should be cut. Now, Jacob, about how many Joe Dirt mullets would you give this movie?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me to give it Joe Dirt peanuts. I'm disappointed. Um, Honestly, probably 3. Like, I don't think this is a terrible movie, even though we came out the gate ragging on it a little bit. I think that the story behind the filming is unfortunate. I think that it's not a very good adaptation of Lovecraft, and I think that the climax was pretty shit. But I think the rest of the film was decent. And I think, in terms of a lot of the horror movies that I've seen, this ranks as at least average.
I'll give it to you. I'll give that to you. It honestly, when hearing you talk about it, I think the biggest crime a horror movie can do is be boring. uh, because we've seen movies across this very vast genre, and there are so many ways to do it and do it interesting, or at least have interesting elements. This movie, I wouldn't say it's boring. It just feels like the person who had to stand up in class and give an oral presentation, but they don't enjoy public speaking. And the teacher knows that not everyone's going to be a good public speaker, so just gives them a B and lets them go forward. It's not it's not great. It's not terrible. It's not even delightfully terrible. It's just mid.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate description. And, you know, you said that you would hate to have to watch this again. I certainly am not going to watch this again for fun. At least it's not very likely, but I don't think I would hate it if I had to. And I think that a lot of the sources of fear are legitimate enough, and the interactions between the family are relatable enough that I would err toward saying deep rather than cut.
I'm gonna say cut just because I've seen this sort of scenario play out to a much better effect. Even if you consider something in the water movies, Cabin Fever is a much better pick.
I have not seen that.
Mm.
Is that something
Essentially,
we might look at?
yeah, I think we might down the road. Basically, the general plot of it is these kids go to a cabin in the woods, like that movie about that cabin in the woods.
Which one?
You know, that movie about that cabin in the woods.
Evil Dead.
No, man, that movie about that cabin in the woods.
All right, well, you just tell me about it.
I miss Mac Miller. Anyway, they go to the cabin in the woods, and there is a flesh eating virus in the water. So basically, the whole movie is people forebodingly drinking water or taking baths or whatever, and things start to happen almost like leprosy. Like this woman's in the shower shaving her legs, and when she's shaving her legs with the razor pulls like that whole strip of skin Ugh,
Ugh.
gives me the chills just thinking about it. Um, but yeah, and it's very scary and it's very poignant considering how they decide how they're going to quarantine, deciding who's been exposed, um, and all that. So it's really interesting to see.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind taking a look at that. Mainly, I'd like to see how they turn that into a story because, I mean, that sounds horrifying to be sure, but you also have to have kind of like a plot and a conflict. And, ugh.
The
Mm.
conflict is that they're slowly rotting from the inside out, and it's mostly like it's mostly like a character play. So you get like the asshole jock saying, "No, man, I didn't even touch her. Y'all are all crazy." And then you have the smart one and the dumb one, and then you have the one that's locked in the barn because she was the first one to get exposed by it. It's a whole thing. And I haven't seen it in forever, so that's pretty much all I can tell you about it. But yeah, that was the curse. That was a curse. I'll probably give it two lard asses, which is a reference to Whil Wheaton and Stand By Me and his character Gordy's story. Two lard ass vomits. Alright, folks, thank you so much for listening. That's our episode this week. If you enjoyed what you hear, go ahead, give us a like, a subscribe, a thumbs up. Go ahead and follow us on our socials as well, which is at Deep Horror Pod across all platforms. If you want to leave us a recommendation and get involved in the conversation, go ahead and send us an email, which is going to be deepcutsofhorror@gmail.com. And again, we like to hear from you. We like to hear about what you want us to cover next. It's really exciting getting involved with our fans and fans of these movies. Make sure to join us next time where we will be covering In the Company of Wolves. We're super excited about that. Can't wait for you to hear it. And until next time, guys, stay spooky.